So I will just leave the word for you, Major.
Hey, everybody. So, I don't know if I could speak for the whole United States military on design. I could probably give you a little journey on that. So, each service has its own college, university that teaches, captains, majors, lieutenant colonels. But so, United States professional military education, intermediate level, we're talking, majors and all services, is governed by the Joint Staff, right? So the United States Joint Staff will provide learning outcomes. So things that you have to teach your students to achieve a certain learning outcome proficiency. Operational design is not one of those learning outcomes. So it's more personality dependent on which school teaches design. Design, came to the United States military, to the School of Advanced Military Studies, SAMS, at Leavenworth, around 2005, 2006 timeframe. And it's been part of that curriculum since then. OFRA's counterpart, Shimon Vey, came there to talk about a new way of planning. The United States found itself in a tight spot in Iraq, and normal planning process was not actually meeting those complex questions. And so from that, SAM's developed a design curriculum, and it's been teaching that ever since. And so SAM's, I guess, was the main route, the main graph that other services kind of looked at and kind of modeled if they wanted to teach design. And again, it's personality driven. It didn't really get to the Marine Corps till after General Van Riper, retired Lieutenant General, who's in education, went to visit School of Advanced Military Studies, brought John Schmidt with him, and observed what SAMS was doing, and then took that and started teaching at the Marine Corps University, but just at the elective level. So at the Command Staff College at the Marine Corps, we'll have electives for 10 lessons, and they would teach, systemic operation design, SOD, pushing a lot on systems theory. And then eventually other military schools will kind of pick it up. I know the Air Force, their advanced studies, their SAS, they teach design. But it wasn't really down to the core curriculum at the command staff level of all the services. I was about ready to retire in 2009. I was at the Marine Corps University as a military officer teaching command staff college, and observed Van Riper in his elective. And I thought this was novel. I did more studying about design and what Shimon Vey was writing, other people was writing. And so when I retired, I was given a job to write an operational art course for the distant education command staff. And then I got with my dean. I said, we need to kind of make this as part of our core curriculum. He agreed. And that was about the only time when it was taught as a core curriculum in all the different services, but it was at the non-resident level. So for the most part, I would not say that design is part of core curriculum in the military, other than maybe at School of Advanced Military Studies for the Army and SAS. It's depending on the personality. Now, we had a director of Marine Corps War College, Colonel Sokol, and he was a SAM student. And he went on to become, a joint planner later on. And the things what he learned at SAMS for the design, he used those ideas in his career at the Joint Staff and other higher headquarters staff. When he came to write doctrine at the Marine Corps, he wrote a military design, a Marine Corps, design methodology handbook. And which is almost similar to the Army Design Methodology Handbook. And he teaches design, since he's a director at the Marine Corps War College. He teaches design for that curriculum. So it's dependent on the personalities. If ones who are all in about design, they'll make sure it's part of that core curriculum. But it's kind of haphazard, in the United States military, and it's depending on those who are bought in on design, they'll find some way to get into the core curriculum. When that individual goes, all right, and there's not somebody in that military education institution, and then if they're not necessarily bought off on design, then it's not taught. Okay. So right now I'm teaching a systems theory design elective at the Resident Command Staff College at the Marine Corps University. And now I'm a contractor. I've been retired. And there's not a military officer that's in Marine Corps Command Staff College that's teaching design, right? It's not necessarily in the curriculum. So me as an outsider comes into their college like, hey, I'll teach this elective for you pro bono. And so it's kind of haphazard, right? And to me, it's obvious that you need to have this as a core curriculum, but they're kind of hesitant. And it doesn't always have to be that way. So that's to who. It all depends. Who's in that academic institution and teaching design. And again, the J7 who governs PME, for all the United States services, if they don't have like a learning outcome that touches on systems thinking, design thinking, then the services don't necessarily have to teach that, right? So it's dependent on the uniform member who they want. If they want the SAMs or SAS, they find that this is very important, then they'll teach it in their curriculum. So with that said, I developed a methodology that, let me see if I can share my screen real quick. Here we go. So I don't know if you all can see this PowerPoint right here or not. Good to go. So
yeah, we see the whole program.
Okay,
there
cool.
It's better.
Yeah, so these are the ones that influence my thoughts on teaching design. So certainly from General Van Riper, Chanel Neve, publications that came out. The J7 did produce a handbook on design, on operational design, but that was like circa 2011. But it's not a learning outcome for the J7. The Army pushed out the Army Design Methodology, followed by the Marine Corps military Marine Corps Design Methodology. I get some ideas from JSAL, SAMS. Certainly, Colonel Perez. He now teaches at the Army War College. Has a lot of good system thinking, design videos on YouTube. Got some things from there, and of course, with my contact with Philippi at the Canadian Forces College. So, that's how I get inspiration to continue to develop, my design thinking and design curriculum. When I wrote a course, a design lesson for the non-resident Marine Corps Command Staff College, when I introduced design, this is how we put design in far as military planning. Okay, that operational design is a extension of operational art, and this is where I think it's kind of problematic in an aspect. Now, when I focus on teaching, Marine majors on operational design, I'm trying to fleet these guys up to participate in a joint staff as a joint task force, or potentially go into a combatant command to do some sort of operational planning for a complex problem. For that combatant command, it could be Indo-PACOM, could be CENTCOM, or it could be a part of a joint staff. So we teach design in the context of operational art. And what's problematic, and Felipe touched on this, is that, the translations between tactical operations and strategic could be difficult, right? Because when you're executing on a tactical ground and you see the complexities, the strategy may not be, matching up to those realities, what's on the ground, okay? And what I tell my students is, it doesn't matter how creative you are in your design approach, okay? If you have bad strategy, you cannot design yourself out of a problem, right? And,
sorry, David, can I just interrupt and ask you to make it full screen rather than just...
I'm sorry.
Yeah, if you just hit F5 or shift F5, that would be good. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's cool.
All right, good to go. So, one thing I tell my students is, if you're executing a complex military problem, all right, either at the JTF, Joint Task Force level, or at the tactical level. It doesn't matter how creative you are. It doesn't matter how ingenious you are in developing a operational approach through design thinking. If you have bad strategy, you cannot design your way out of bad strategy, full stop, right? And as our strategic pub, MCP1 TAC 1 strategy, battlefield brilliance cannot rescue bad strategy, right? And unfortunately for United States military, and this is, from my observation, looking at this, the military cannot, necessarily design themselves out of a bad strategy. So the strategic art is not necessarily is waning, I guess. All right. If you kind of look at Afghanistan, Vietnam, Iraq, not necessarily being in touch with reality on the ground. And then from what I got from OFRA, you have this strategic drift. And if you have a huge strategic drift, then everything downrange of that, your national security strategy, national military strategy, and campaign planning is going to be a drift from that. And so that's one thing I press upon the students in that aspect. So if you're divergent from your strategic art, then everything downstream, and you can't necessarily design your way out of bad strategy. And there's some, from Vietnam, I don't think the military, institutions did a good job on addressing that, because a lot of my colleagues, former colleagues, would say, well, if you would just let the military do what it wanted to do, we could win this war. No, you couldn't. Okay. Because we had the strategic art wrong, and then everything downstream was going to be problematic. And so, but however, operational design will inform of that strategic drift. But it'll also have to be straight shooters. Like, I cannot necessarily design my way out of this bad strategy. All right. So we have to kind of adjust the strategy or, punch out. So that's how I teach design in the Marine Corps in that aspect, as part of strategic art, part of operational art, and trying to, understand using systems thinking to understand the complexities of that problem set. So that's a long and short of it. I'm sorry I went over time, but free to entertain any questions.
No, I'm already and keep wanting to ask questions, and Oprah's waiting to get going. But to me, there's things to do with rational, non-rational, and irrational. And at the political level, they're thinking of things different to us as the military level. And sometimes they will send us into combat with rubber bullets or with one hand tied behind our back, and for reasons that we don't understand or don't know. The thing about design thinking is not about having a perfect solution. It's about making the best of what you've got, and is never a perfect solution. So while I agree, and there's a lot of maxims about, no brilliant women technical level commander is going to solve a problem which has got a bad plan. We are bounded by political constraints and multi-agency and international and coalition requirements. But it does cascade down, I agree. But my argument would be that at the strategic level, they should be using design as well. And if they're using design thinking, then it's going to be much more holistic. But at the same time, sometimes we have to accept the fact that in the military, at either the operational or the tactical level, we are constrained by 1 up, 2 up, and we don't understand what they're thinking. But we don't throw our hands in the air and walk away. We just suck it up. And there's a good American expression, it's probably a Marine Corps expression about, I'm trying to remember what it is, feel the suck or something. What is it?
Embrace the suck.
That's the one. Thank you. It took a Canadian to tell me a Marine Corps woman expression. Anyway.
I got it. But what I'm telling my students, you have to be a straight shooter, right? Because, if you kind of look at how we do strategy, all right, with the United States, it all starts with the popular political philosophy. Whatever that popular political philosophy is, we'll have politics. Politics will then put policy. Policy will then put strategy. Okay. And you see a diversion from the United States. For example, President Obama, wanted to do the 5+1 with Iran. President Trump comes in. Okay. Kick the 5+1 out. So you have different political philosophy, which changes politics, which changes policy, which changes strategy. Okay. And what I'm trying to respond to my students, if they apply systems thinking to the problem set to kind of look at the strategic as way down to the tactical, trying to understand the complexity of that system and be able to tell you this is what the military can do for you and this is what they can't do for you. All right. And so what happened is, you have 20 years in Afghanistan. All right. You have 10 years in Vietnam with 56,000 Americans dead. All right. That, that's the gravity. If you don't inform the strategic level that the strategic arc is divergent from reality, and the military with the can-do attitude cannot tactically win a strategic drift problem. And that's
what a good segue for Oprah.
and to me, that's my passion on teaching design, and try to limit strategic offsets and provide good counsel and train majors to then become colonels, then become generals, right? To inform the political policy on what can happen and what can't happen. Or we'll have another 20 years in another country. All right.
Okay. Thank you.